How does science point us towards God? And why is this important? For me, there's four things that stands out. The Bible actually commands it. Our culture demands it. The church needs it, and the results confirm it. Jesus actually said to his disciples that you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all of your mind. It's possible to find God through critical thinking and looking at the evidence and looking at science and what we know and understand at modern science. And for me, just for me personally, I grew up in a Christian home, and I always just knew God. I was able to walk in a field with him and talk to him like he's a friend next to mine. And then about 8 years ago, I moved to the United States, got divorced, was a single mother immigrant with no support network, lost my job, and my bottom just completely fell out. And during that time, it was hard for me to see a good God. And I started questioning it. And the thing that actually brought me back was this desire to look at, well, what does science say? What is the evidence? Is this really true or not? So for me, it's then also having the ability to tell people why you believe. And I think that's important, to have an answer, that it's not just, a fairy tale and I just believe it because it gives me comfort. I believe it because I believe it's truth. And I think that's what our church needs and our culture. People want to know truth. So there are two worldviews in terms of how we got here. Two broad worldviews. One is an atheistic, materialistic, naturalistic worldview, and how that fits into science is that long time ago there were some basic elements. These turned into gases, simple gases, that was a primordial soup, and through things like lightning that formed simple amino acids, and then through an unguided process of evolution, that's how we see all the complexity of life around us. And there was even a guy in 1953, Professor Urey at the University of Chicago, who was a Nobel laureate, and his student, Stanley Miller. And they did an experiment that where they had some basic gases that they thought mirrored early Earth conditions, methane, ammonia, hydrogen, in water, and they applied electricity to this, electricity blasts. And they were able to demonstrate that some simple amino acids formed. So at the time, it was accepted as a way to demonstrate how we could actually have ended up here, just by simple chance and time. A couple of problems with that. Time and chance actually fits an eternal universe better. That because the more time you have, the more chance there is for these random reactions to occur, as well as the random mutations of Darwinian evolution. And until fairly recently, science actually held the view of an eternal universe. So Einstein, when he did some mathematical models to describe the universe, he actually started to see that the universe could have had a beginning, But he actually put in a fudge factor because he didn't like the fact that the universe had a beginning. So, but the more we progressed in science, the more clear it became that, yeah, there actually was a beginning. And this was through Edwin Hubble, who observed through his telescopes that galaxies are actually moving away from each other. And that told us that at some point they were together. And we can also observe some background microwave radiations, and Hawkins and a couple of people actually proved that if Einstein hadn't put in this fudge factor, his models would have predicted a beginning for the universe. So the consensus among scientists today actually is that the universe had a beginning about 13.5 billion years ago. And that kind of makes it more difficult for both the origin of life and the evolution process to actually explain the complexity of life. Billions of years just make it a little bit less likely. So what does science tell us in terms of how the universe began? Well, if something didn't cause it, then nothing caused it. The universe simply sprang into being from nothing. What we also observe within the universe is that there is evidence of fine-tuning and also the laws of physics, and that the universe can be mapped by mathematical models is incredibly. Einstein said that the only thing unfathomable about the universe is that it's fathomable, that you can describe it. And fine-tuning is, we realized fairly recently through science that there's a number of things that needed to be exactly right for carbon-based life to be and thrive here on this earth. And it's things like just for the universe itself to exist, the gravitational constant needs to be very, very specific. The expansion rate needs to be very specific. If it's too fast or too slow, the universe wouldn't have formed. There's a couple of things about our Earth that is very unique, that its axis needs to be tilted just in a specific way. Our moon, the planet Jupiter, to actually keep asteroids away from us. Tectonic activity. So the estimate is that there's about 300 parameters that needed to be exactly right for carbon-based complex life to actually thrive on this planet. And the probability of just chance accounting for that is close to impossible. So what science actually, the best held alternative explanation for this fine-tuning that we see is infinite multiverses, and that we just happen to be on the one that has all of these different 300 parameters exactly right for life to be here. So that is how an atheistic, materialistic, naturalistic worldview fits in modern science, and I already hinted on some of the problems with that in my view. So how does a theistic worldview fit into science? This gap of what caused the universe kind of fits God. Because whatever has a beginning needs a cause. That's just a general scientific rule. that nothing just comes from nothing. And whatever caused the universe needs to be outside of time and space, immaterial, eternal, and immensely powerful. And that kind of fits God. And, a lot of people comes with the argument, yeah, so if God started the universe, then who created God? What is hard for us to understand is that modern physics actually tells us that time had a beginning. Time started. And whatever caused the universe is outside of time and space. God is eternal. He didn't have a beginning because he started time. A linear progression of time actually started when the universe started. And this also takes a pantheistic worldview off the table, because whatever caused the universe cannot be the universe itself. That's pantheistic, is that, well, actually the universe is God. Because whatever caused it had to be outside, separate from it. X cannot cause X. X can cause Y. So God kind of fits into what modern science know in terms of a beginning. Yeah, but that's just the God of the gaps argument. I've heard that one before. So we just don't know yet what caused the universe to begin. So kind of fitting God into that. And that's not true. The evidence points that something created the universe. There needs to be a creator. There needs to be a cause. It needs to be outside of time and space. It needs to be immaterial, eternal, and immensely powerful. There's a God-sized gap in science, an exact that has the shape and size of God. So it's not just a simple God of the gaps. We don't know what lightning is, and therefore we prescribed it to gods, like they did in Greek mythology. This is saying that looking at what modern science knows about the origins of our universe, it pretty accurately describes a creator or a cause. And then some other problems with the other explanations of how we are here is that this experiment of Miller in 1953, the primordial soup gases that they used in the experiment actually doesn't fit with what we now know early Earth conditions looked like. Early Earth conditions was probably more volcanic and carbon dioxide, which doesn't have a path towards amino acids. And then secondly, he also did his experiments in borosilica glass, which acted as a catalyst. When the experiment was repeated using Teflon, there were no amino acids that formed. But when a little bit of boron catalyst was added, the amino acids actually did form. So there's some serious questions about this experiment. It has in essence been discredited. There's also no evidence of an infinite multiverse. It's a theory. There's no actual way of confirming that there are multiverses. And even if there are multiverses, since our universe had a beginning, all of the others would also have had a beginning. So it still doesn't answer the question about a cause. So for me, really, the fact that there's something rather than nothing, that we are here, that is the strongest thing that actually points towards a cause. Something caused it. And science has very little in terms of any answer other than a creator of why we are here. But then, what about evolution? And a couple of thoughts here on evolution. So the question is, if Darwin evolution is true, does that mean that God doesn't exist? So I have some questions about evolution, and typically when you say that, then the response from your peers is, oh, you're a creationist lunatic and you probably believe the earth is flat too, right? And no, I have questions about the validity of evolution, and here's why. That we see evidence of irreducible complexity, and this was a coined term by a biologist, Mike Behe, and there are a couple of examples that he's highlighted. He wrote a couple of books about it. And one example is the bacterial flagellum. And when you look at this image of it, for me, I'm a trained scientist. I work as an engineer. At the moment, when I look at this diagram, it looks like an engineered product. And it has a shaft, it has rings, it has a motor. So what Mike Behe is saying is that all of these things work so interconnectedly that you can't take it back to a single form. And he has a mousetrap as an example of something that we know that is irreducibly complex. That when you have a mousetrap, you need the spring, you need the clamp, you need the base, you need the cheese. And all of these work together to catch the mouse. And you can't take it back to a single part of it, because they needed to be built together. Something needed to look at it and say, well, I need these and these things to work together to actually give me this. And that's what Mike Behe is claiming in terms of something like the bacterial flagellum, that there's no logical single point that this can actually be brought back to. And that then has serious implications for Darwin's evolution. The answer for people who don't want to accept a creator is that there's things like gene repurposing. So a gene kind of developed for another application and was just naturally repurposed in this. And Behe actually argues, and he wrote a second book to address some of these questions, where he did some maths and some testing, and he says that gene repurposing does not explain the coordinated changes needed. So there's still serious question about an unguided Darwinian evolution process. And then secondly, what does the fossil records tell us? So there doesn't appear to be, and this is just my understanding, there doesn't appear to be evidence in the fossil records of like these single cell organisms, and then to more and more complexity to where we actually are today. And then there's the Cambrian explosion as well, which kind of shows us that really complex animal lives that has spines and vertebrae sprang into life in a fairly short time. It appears in the rock strata. And if the age of the Earth is around 24 hours, then at about 21 hours, in a 2-minute span, there was this explosion of life that happens. And that seems to me to not truly fit into the fossil records or the Darwinian evolution. There are some people who still claim that this doesn't matter. It actually does fit. So I don't know about that one. And a recent argument I heard as well was we haven't observed in all of the time of science since we started doing science, we haven't seen any evidence of evolution, of species changing. We've seen microevolution, so small things within species that have changed, but not a single species have changed over, and yeah, that it might not just be a couple of 100 years but that kind of tells me that if there's no concrete evidence for evolution, it hasn't been tested, it hasn't been observed. It's kind of looking at the evidence and coming to a conclusion that hasn't been completely tested or verified. And it's kind of, if you raise this, that again, you're a creationist lunatic and you're into creationist nonsense. That's typically the dismissive argument about that. And then also just thinking about evolution, how, I heard somebody ask the question about, so who evolved first, the male or the female? Did they evolve at the same spot? Why would they evolve at the same spot at the same time? Because I mean, for the male to reproduce, he would need sperm, and why would he develop sperm if there wasn't a female that he could deposit the sperm in to reproduce? So I don't know. I don't, just in my view, and I'm not an expert here, but I have questions about evolution. But I think in evolution, it's probably the part of science that has the strongest point to make when it comes to anti-creationism. And I'll explain to you in a bit what I mean with that. And then DNA, it looks like coding billions of letters in specific sequences. That time and chance caused this, I don't know. That seems hard for me to believe. And there are some people who talk about, well, that junk DNA actually supports evolution. And Francis Collins, who was the head of the Human Genome Project, he actually, he's a Christian. He actually wrote a book about the language of God, but he believes in evolution, Darwin's evolution. And he actually said, that this junk DNA actually seems to support evolution. And then in the 1980s, there was a guy called Richard Haddison who created a computer program that could randomly start writing sentences by just keeping keywords constant. So he actually managed to reproduce a Shakespeare's entire play in a couple of days by just keeping these key letters constant. So 2 questions about that again. Junk DNA seems to be the Darwin of the gaps. And junk DNA may actually have a purpose. And fairly recently, there's been a lot of papers publishing in that yeah, what we kind of thought with junk DNA actually has a purpose. It's not just junk. And then this experiment in terms of keeping some letters constant that's really truly a random process, starting from complete chaos. I don't know. I just have questions about that. And then biologists have not been able to reproduce the tree of life yet. Okay, so for me, I think that the section of where people with a that wants to support an atheistic, so the so-called new atheists that are quite aggressive and demeaning the way they talk about Christians, you're deluded and you just hold on to this, or you just the way that Richard Dawkins put it, you're sucking on your deluded religious pacifier because you want to feel better. And especially when it comes to evolutionists, it tends to be very, very derogatory, very, creationist lunacy or creationist nonsense. And anybody who just says anything opposite is should be banned, should be. So a couple of things here. And, I actually do know some Christians who doesn't have a problem with Darwinian evolution. They say that, well, who says God couldn't have used this pathway? So if Darwinian evolution is true, does that mean that God doesn't exist? For me, it is kind of, if you look just at this, just at Darwin evolution, you don't think about a cause, you don't think about that we began just in isolation, that 300 years ago when Darwin actually lived, when they believed that the universe was eternal, or the scientific community believed that then it was a lot more plausible as an answer. So if you didn't have any other context, then an unguided process makes God less likely. So if this was all you knew, that yes, evolution is and evolution is true, then it kind of makes God less likely. And I think that's why there's so much vocal derogatory things, because this is when you look at science and people who want to use science to actually disprove God, this is probably their strongest argument in evolution. And this is also, the mainstream accepted things. This is what kids get taught in schools. This is what colleges study, biologists study. It's the most widely accepted theory. But even if it is true, it still doesn't give you the answer of where the universe started or where life started. So let's say, and it's kind of, when I think about God and the way he creates, for me, he uses naturalistic processes that he kind of ignites and starts, and then let it follow. So even evolution, that we came from a single species, is not for me incompatible with God. It's still, he could have started it and then let it flow. And it kind of fits into God's nature as well, that he created humanity because he wanted a family, and he didn't want to create robots who just would automatically love him. And that's kind of why he gave us free will and all of the problems that comes with free will, because that's the only way that you can truly determine whether somebody loves you and wants to be with you. I mean, if you're in a romantic relationship, you don't want somebody to be with you and to love you because they are forced or coerced or they don't have another choice. That God is giving us a choice, and that for me answers a couple of things in terms of if God is if there really is a God and he is really good, why is there so much pain and suffering in the world? And for me, that's free will. He has to allow free will. How else is he gonna know that we truly love him, that we want to be with him? And this life is an instant. It's a vapor and then it's over. And what God promises us is that he will make everything work towards our good, even the most horrendous things. And I have been through, in my childhood, severe trauma, severely horrendous things that nobody should go through. And in my life, I know that God has made that for my good. So let's say we accept that a creator fits. That, yeah, the universe had a beginning, there's fine-tuning, there's evidence of coding, there's laws of physics, there's irreducible complexity. How do we know that he's good or that he's personable? And for me, the evidence kind of points towards a good and personal God. I mean, if you look at how complex this universe is, how incredibly big, he went to a really large amount of trouble to actually get us here, to actually make us. That seems to be personable. And the beauty in life. We could have sustained ourselves. We didn't need to eat food, and there didn't need to be all of this flavor and this these that are taste buds, that we can taste it and enjoy it and enjoy food. That sex is enjoyable. It could have been really analytical, cold ways of reproducing. So all of this for me indicates that God is personable and good. And then morality. And this is not to say that an atheist cannot be a good person. What it is saying is that an atheistic worldview reduces you to that there's no morality, it just is. Chemistry is not good or bad. Killing somebody for survival of the fittest is not bad. So why is it that we know that it's bad? Because it was built into us. There's this sense of knowing what is right or wrong. And if there is no God, then there is no absolute morality. And Christians believed that God's goodness was incredibly displayed in the life of Jesus Christ of Nazareth, a man who lived for a short time 2,000 years ago, but who impacted the world like no other. So that kind of brings me to the next point. Is Christianity the right religion? Even if you embraced a theistic worldview now, there are so many options. Which one is actually the true one? And for me, it is Christianity for a number of reasons. First of all, that there's an incredible the New Testament is an incredibly well preserved document of all of the documents that we have from antiquity, pre 350 AD. The New Testament is the most abundant, with about 5,800 Greek copies and then 18,000 in other languages. So that's about 24,000. The second most abundant book is Homer's Iliad, a poem, where there's about 1,900 copies. We know when the Old Testament was written, there was a process that was documented called the Septuagint by at the request of a guy whose name I can't pronounce, but it's in the slide here. So he gave about 72 scribes. Septuagintus means 70 in Latin. He gave them the request to actually translate the Bible into Greek. So we know that was about 300 years before Christ. We also know when the New Testament was written, because there's some real people that other sources confirm. So Pilate, for example, is also confirmed. So real people are mentioned. So this kind of tells us that the Old Testament was written before the New Testament. And there's over 300 policies about Christ in the Old Testament that he actually fulfilled. And a mathematician called Peter Stoner, he was a statistician who was one of the leading mathematicians in the US. He actually calculated what the probability is of one person fulfilling only 8 of those prophecies, and he found it to be 1 in 10 to the power of 17. So incredibly rare. And then there's another book, a really interesting book by Warner Wallace, who wrote the Cold Case for Christ. He was a cold case detective and an atheist, and he wanted to consider the Gospels from an eyewitness perspective, which is kind of what he did in his day job, to look at whether it's reliable eyewitness testimony, because that is exactly what the Gospels were. It was a couple of guys who wrote down what they saw, what they experienced. And a couple of things to him indicated that it's reliable eyewitness accounts. One of it is that there actually is some small discrepancies in the Gospels. So like when some of them describe that there was only one angel when the rock was thrown away, others say 2. And that actually indicates reliability in Detective Wallace's view. They typically, when they talk to eyewitnesses and they decided to collude and make up a story, then they tend to be very very similar stories. So it's kind of like they got together and said, this guy was wearing blue shirt, red pants, black shoes, and everybody has that exact level of detail, and that raises some questions in terms of, did they actually collude to just make up this story? So the fact that there's small differences is more natural and more consistent with true eyewitness testimony. I mean, the guy who said there was an angel didn't say there was just one angel. Maybe he just meant the one angel was specifically here and the other one was somewhere else. So it's, as long as the main timeline of what they are describing, or the underlying testimony is the same for everybody, then that is accepted as true. Then secondly, the fact that it's written in the Bible that it was actually women who saw the empty tomb first. Women were seen as second-class citizens. They were not allowed to testify in court in the antiquity world. So if you're going to make up a story, don't say women were actually saw the empty tomb, because that's going to make your story less credible. So the only reason why they would say that it was women was because it was women who saw the empty tomb. And then the third one is what Wallace also described, is that people who tend to make up a story typically don't make up a story that makes them look bad. And the disciples were a bunch of very mercurial people. I mean, they fought against amongst each other about who's the most important. They ran off and abandoned Christ in his time of need. They seem to be like a fairly scattered, unreliable bunch. And then something changed in them. So if they would make up a story, they wouldn't make us something up that makes them look bad. And then the fact that all of them were willing to be tortured to death, that's kind of indicating that this is actually true. And you might say, yeah, well, a lot of people believe that they will be given paradise, if they are like a suicide bomber. So that's not too out of the possibility. But the thing there is that you might be willing to die for a lie that you believe is the truth. But if you made up a lie with your friends, are you going to die for what you know is a lie? For no gain, no reason. That just doesn't seem to fit. And then the Bible is a remarkable book. If you look at this image, there's over 68,000 cross-references within the Bible. So all these lines shows cross-references from one part of the Bible to another. And even if this was a single person who wrote this incredible book, this would be pretty remarkable. But this was a book written by 40 authors over the span of about 1,500 years. So there's something pretty incredible about this book. The level of beauty and cohesivity in it is remarkable. So in our society today, it kind of looks like God has been legislated out of culture, or removed, or marginalized, and dismissed as something that you cannot measure and test, therefore it's irrelevant. And people who believe in a God are demeaned. People are talking about you believe in fairy tales, and people who believe in God must also believe in the Easter Bunny. Condescension and belittlement. So for me, the problem with God for the modern world is not that he's unfathomable or unimaginable. He actually fits. I mean, when you look at it, when you go and sit down and look at the evidence, look at what we know about science today, and think critically about how that fits into a creator, God actually fits better than nothing. So for me, I think it's our disappointment or shame that separates us. And for me, that was personally, that was certainly true. That that the times in my life where I struggled the most, where I was going through the most hurt, and all of us go through trauma. And at some point, you, whether that's intentionally or unintentionally, you transfer that hurt and that disappointment to God. And that seems like a good God is unimaginable. So you reject this more out of an emotional reaction rather than a logical reaction, that it's just unfathomable that there could be a good God. So it kind of looks like a fairy tale, and you don't want to know it. And then personal testimonies is also such a millions of people have described encounters with God, have described how their lives are changed, how they were saved from addiction. And here's mine. I told you that I moved to the United States about 8 years ago, and as a single mom, I had no support network here. And about 2 years after I moved here, I decided it's time to buy a house. So I actually just signed for my house. I haven't even, it's that period between signing and actually starting to pay your mortgage. So at that exact point, I lost my job. And I was so scared. I cannot tell you how scary that was, because I didn't have any family here, so I don't have a mom who I can go and live with. I had absolutely nobody here. Very few friends. There was nobody that I could go to. So I was stressed out of my mind about what I was going to do. And I was talking to a friend in South Africa, a pastor, really good pastor friend. And he gave me a text message to encourage me. And that text message was, "Today you are crying, but in the morning you will celebrate." And when I got that message, I just took it. I just believed it. It was like, this, I know this was meant for me. And I woke up the next morning, and I had no clue. I didn't even know where I would begin searching for a job. I had very few network connections. I didn't know where to start. So I woke up and I said, "God, I don't know how you're gonna fix this, but I trust you. You're gonna figure it out." And that afternoon, on LinkedIn, I got a message from a recruiter from a major company, a Fortune 500 company, that was looking for somebody with my skills and experience. And it was like the job was written for me. Like somebody looked at my my experience over the last 12 years and wrote a job description around that. It was so specific. And my management later told me, they told this recruiter, "Look globally. We don't expect that you might not even find somebody in America. Look in Europe, look in Africa, look everywhere." And they were really surprised when they found somebody that were based in Houston. And yeah, people can dismiss that and say, it's just a coincidence. But there's been so many just coincidences in my life after I prayed. after I laid things at God's feet, things that changed when I prayed, that I know that I know that I know that God is true. And I know that He is love and He is good.